This is potentially the most balanced video series I've ever made, split into 3 parts, the playlist in the description as well as links to the other episodes as they release. The idea is to take all major topics revolving around Assassin's Creed Valhalla and try to argue as best I can both sides, the positives and the negatives. Play devil's advocate with myself to see when the game launches where I actually fall with my opinion. And you can do the same. Let me know in the comments. In the first part of this series, we discussed the pros and cons of the open world, mythological elements, and the assassin mythos of Valhalla. If you haven't yet seen part 1, check that out before continuing here, all links are below. In part 2, I wanted to delve into some more interesting topics, divisive ones for sure, but I have a fair bit to say on each. So without further ado, let's hop into part 2 of this Assassin's Creed Valhalla miniseries. Combat is a very divisive topic when it comes to Assassin's Creed. Ask any amount of people and you'll get different answers. Some people prefer the swift and stylish combat of Brotherhood, some prefer what we see in Black Flag, where you're swashbuckling with different tools at your disposal. Some people are really into Unity, which is focused more on challenge whilst also making you look pretty good in the process, and some people prefer the stat-based hitbox combat systems of the newer games. And of course there are people in between all of these. There are so many combat systems in this series, all with their own merits and pitfalls. Valhalla continues the more recent entries traditions of having a hitbox based system, however toned down from what we saw before in Odyssey, where some enemies would take hundreds of hits and instead they take quite a bit fewer, making it a lot more reasonable. Their focus seems to be on weight, on gore, on what the Viking fantasy is all about, and I've heard that it feels better to play than it looks to watch, giving you this sense of player control and decent damage being dealt. I for one hated Odyssey's combat. It was entirely revolving around these huge arbitrary numbers and enemies could take so many hits it was ridiculous. Whereas when you're looking at Origins, sure it was based on stats and your player level as well, but there was a lot based on skill as well. If you timed your dodges right, dealt enough damage, you could still take out enemies that were quite a few levels above you. Odyssey made it almost impossible to do so. In this game we're seeing it revolve around a power level rather than a player skill level, and so enemies aren't level gated in the same way they were before. It all depends on your gear and skills rather than how high a level you are, which is a lot more accessible and focuses on things that actually matter rather than what number level you are. The finishes look brutal and satisfying, the enemies are going down relatively quickly and that's always nice in a franchise like Assassin's Creed, whilst you still have to be careful about how much damage you take. Loot is all unique and it's all about building up your collection rather than having 60 steel swords that you sell, and there's also a vast range of weapons for you to use and fight with. The combat feels accessible and feels like there is a lot of opportunity for players to fight how they wish. Maybe dual wield shields, or use your hidden blade to stun enemies in one hand and swing your sword with the other. Maybe dual wield swords like AC4, or just one sword like traditional Assassin's Creed. You can choose to use axes like a Viking or whatever you want. It feels like there's a lot more variety and opportunity for the players in this game, and I truly appreciate that. I do expect when I have the game in my hand it'll feel satisfying no matter how clumsy it might look on screen. That all being said, however, it does look atrocious. I think it's safe to say, looking at the gameplay, it does look awful, messy, and clunky. And I'm very aware that games can feel right, whereas they look bad, and coming back after playing, they look a lot better because you can remember how it felt to have the controller in your hand and play it yourself. A great example is Jedi Fallen Order. It looked fucking stupid, the lightsaber combat looked the right state, but when you play it, it feels fucking right, it feels good, and hopefully Valhalla is the same. I hate to say it, but stat-based, hitbox-based systems don't belong in this franchise. Origins tried to balance it out, but even then it came across as contrived and silly. The combat in traditional AC games, although it can be easy, is about being this nimble, stylish, and efficient assassin, like we see with Ezio. I think the only fix they really needed for this system was to give Ezio way less health, maybe 2-3 hits and you're dead. That way, keeping your combo flowing whilst keeping your guard up makes it a challenge whilst also being satisfying and delivering an assassin fantasy. Then there's the in-between stage between these two systems, which is more like a Ghost of Tsushima, which is incredibly satisfying to play and allows you to feel efficient at the same time. Going for a system more like that in the future could benefit this franchise greatly. Also, the older games were grounded. The combat here has numbers flying on the screen, you're seeing fire swords and poison effects, and it's just not for me, man. No matter how grounded the actual game is, when you're whipping out a flame sword with 10% chance to do crit damage on low health with an epic frost rune ability, it's just stupid. It really takes me out of the experience. The added fact that Odyssey's abilities return makes me more wary. Sure, they've toned them down, which I really appreciate, but I still think throwing tons of axes or doing the dive of the Valkyries where you throw yourself into the air to come crashing down to do damage on your enemies is honestly so comical, and the fact that enemies go absolutely flying when you kill them, similar to Odyssey, just makes the whole thing an arcadey mess rather than the gritty Viking experience they said they wanted to nail. Layla Hassan has carried the modern day for the past 3 years. I say carried, I mean she dragged it along begrudgingly, but things look interesting with this entry. I've said this before, but the modern day, as much as before I cared about it deeply, I love Assassin's Creed 1 to Revelation so much, and I cared about it still for some years after that, hoping Origins would take us into a new narrative arc that never felt substantial and never really went anywhere. If anyone can characterize Layla in a way that feels organic and compelling, it's Darby and his talented team of writers. I can't say I have much of a stake in this anymore. Ask me 5 years ago when Syndicate was coming out and I'd tell you the modern day better be fucking brilliant as it's important and I want to be invested so badly, but now I don't really care because they've proven for 9 years now that they just don't get it. This could be great, and I would really love for it to be, especially since it used to mean a great deal to me, and I know it still does to many of you, but I think I came to the realization a few years back that it won't ever be what it was, and so I just stopped putting any effort into caring. That being said though, Darby has hinted at a lot to look forward to, saying he's very much excited for what he's done with Layla. Obviously, it can't please everyone, and so when you've got articles saying, Layla will be likeable, oh my god, you've got to realize not everyone is going to love it, and I'm sure he's tried his best. Obviously, he'd want to, and I'm sure him and his team are very pleased, but don't go into this expecting that because he said he thinks we'll like Layla, that we all will, because too much damage has maybe been done, but I'm certainly open to it. They've done a lot of looking into Brotherhood for the modern day in Valhalla. The way that it's structured is a huge positive that I touch upon in my Brotherhood retrospective coming soon. All the modern day storytelling is within the Animus for the most part. Sure, there are portions outside of the Animus, but a lot is dealt with inside of the machine, meaning you're not constantly being sucked out, but it also doesn't mean that it doesn't exist at the same time, experiencing it seamlessly, which Brotherhood nailed with the glyph puzzles and truth sequences, only leaving the Animus for the opening and the ending, with optional dialogue and emails if you choose to leave and seek out those things. Not only does this streamline the experience, but it means there are a lot of options for the dev team and for the player, and I think this is the perfect route for the modern day, and I hope they've taken a lot more from Brotherhood when building this segment of the game. They've already said that the rifts Layla will visit allow you to experience Layla segments and dialogue with big info drops at the end of each one, similar to Desmond exploring the guts of the Animus in the Assassin's Creed Brotherhood truth sequence. Hopefully they took more on board from Brotherhood's modern day structuring too. Not to mention, Darby has said that this game is trying to culminate a lot of what has come before, not ending or capping off, but taking a lot, not all, but a lot of previous storylines and using those in order to tell a narrative that fits into the pre-established canon. Hopefully they'll explain a lot of context, and hopefully we'll see the return of many elements that before went unfinished. I'm not expecting too much, as I've known disappointment too many times, but he's been bigging it up a lot, and I wouldn't blame you if you were incredibly excited for this. No matter how right this game gets it, we won't see a return to form. Without a true lore master or brand man like Marvel has Kevin Feige, someone with an overarching direction for narrative or control of lore, we won't see proper cohesion or direction the way we did under Patrice's control of Assassin's Creed in 2004 to 2010. Darby stated he doesn't want that job, and that's fair. I do think it would be useful to have a group of dedicated fans fill that position. I'm not saying myself, although I'd fucking do it. I'm a walking Assassin's Creed encyclopedia, and I need to do something with it before I explode. Without that, no matter how right Valhalla gets it, the next game won't feel like a meaningful sequel, nor will the game after. We won't get moments like Brotherhood giving us the location of the Grand Temple, which is then visited 2 games later in Assassin's Creed 3. We won't get the arc of Subject 16 across 4 games, or the setup of Juno and the destiny of Desmond, Ezio being the conduit, or the link across time we see in Altair's library. It's impossible without someone at the helm of all Assassin's Creed projects with a 5 to 10 year plan, the same same way it started out with and the same way Marvel utilizes it in the MCU. There are too many comics, too many novels, too much fluff to continue this in a collected and enjoyable way. Assassin's Creed is spread so thin with no true narrative direction that you're never going to truly be able to return to what made it so incredibly compelling all those years ago. I'm not saying Valhalla won't be incredibly satisfying as a single modern day story, but it will never capture what I loved so much about the modern day originally, which is telling a story that links from game to game, stringing together what are otherwise separate stories. Assassin's Creed has three core pillars. You've obviously got stealth and social stealth, the combat, and the parkour. You physically cannot have an Assassin's Creed game without parkour. Well, you could do, but that would be as ridiculous as removing social stealth. Assassin's Creed Valhalla uses the same climbing engine as Origins and Odyssey, two games that didn't have a great deal of parkour. Lots of climbing, but not a lot of parkour. Valhalla boasts using the system as best they can, and for that I'm truly grateful. Of course, when you're out in the country, parkour will be scarce, and you're more going to be using the mechanic for climbing cliffs and getting up to viewpoints, all that jazz. However, when in city areas, built up urban environments, it's said that they are built to facilitate parkour, allowing for players to use well-crafted areas to free run, to leap from building to building, or follow paths entirely created for the act of free running and parkour rather than just mindless climbing that we've seen in more recent titles, which is brilliant to hear. Of course, we can't know to what extent this is until we play the game, but to hear that has me truly looking forward to seeing what they have in store. From what we've seen too, the flow of climbing looks a lot better. Pulling yourself onto ledges seems faster and more fluid, as well as the actual climbing itself looking a lot more organic rather than Spider-Manning your way up to the top of a building or cliff. I believe that feature is still there to an extent, but it seems to look a lot more like what you'd expect from climbing these cliff faces or walls. You've got the reintroduction of flying collectibles similar to the shanties or almanac pages in these tattoos that will fly away from you as soon as you get close, and you need to use the environment and your parkour to chase after them, meaning that the environments have to be created to facilitate engaging and fluid parkour so you can catch the collectible. All in all, it looks like they've taken an engine that was more geared towards climbing anything and have managed to push it towards what we expect from a parkour system, using the environment to move faster and reach an objective. Don't be expecting the complexity of earlier titles or even the likes of Unity allowing for free-flowing parkour moves, but I do expect what they've done in cities with Valhalla to be a damn sight closer than what we saw in Origins and Odyssey. Sadly though, despite the parkour being better than what we saw in Origins and Odyssey, it still doesn't come close to what we really need out of a franchise that is all about parkour and free running. You're still locked to a wall when climbing, preventing side ejects except from very particular instances where you're almost breaking the game to achieve it, and making back ejects entirely impossible. It's crazy that in a franchise that began with entire levels created to utilize the complexity and control of the parkour system, we've managed to reach a point where parkour pretty much doesn't exist, and player creativity and agency is entirely out the window. There is no skill involved and there's nothing to learn here. Sure, sometimes in cities you might be able to follow paths that are laid out to make it feel more smooth, which is a big help, but the fact is the base system doesn't allow the player to do anything other than move in a straight line, climb up, down, and jump. You can't be creative. It feels unresponsive if Origins and Odyssey are anything to go off of, and it's far too much on rails. When you're climbing a tower, you're holding up and tapping the jump button. You aren't scaling a building, searching for handholds and using the climb leap appropriately and making sure you're careful. You're just spamming and it's all automated now, and it takes away from player engagement and skill. Adding to this, as much as Unity was also quite an on-rails experience, it allowed for style and finesse. It looked great even if it was all pretty much automatic. In this new engine, it's so sloppy looking and so sluggish and feels like dropping a rock from a ledge rather than an assassin stringing moves together to quickly navigate an environment. Talking about dropping a rock, this game has pretty much no fall damage. Like, it does have damage, but you don't really die, and it's pretty ridiculous. Assassin's Creed was always quite forgiving with its fall damage, but that was mostly because the buildings were all so high, you'd be doing a lot of falling. And even still, if you jump from a high building wrong, you were dead. Valhalla, for one, the buildings are all pretty low, and so the fall damage should really compensate for that. But also, you can jump from high points and somehow take damage and just not die. It's odd because you're not going to be doing much falling in this game. It's not like the earlier games where every action was determined by player input, and so you had to be careful, and if you mistimed a jump or pressed the wrong button, you'd be punished with fall damage or death. In this new engine, you can't unstick from a wall once you're climbing. You can only move left, right, up, and down. You can't jump from a wall, so it's not even like you're going to be falling that often. So why is fall damage this forgiving? Is it really because Odyssey introduced a no fall damage feature and so they felt they had to compromise? If so, what happened to not including things just because they were in a previous one? Get rid of features that suck. Not taking fall damage in a game that pushes climbing and learning that system is dumb. Just remove it. Don't try and compromise. Odyssey implemented something stupid. Just get rid of it and admit it was dumb and move on. This seems like an even dumber middle ground and pleases nobody. And that wraps up part 2 of my excitement and concerns for Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss part 3. If you haven't checked out part 1 for whatever reason still at this point, go and check it out. The links are in the description to part 1 and part 3, obviously, when it comes out. Everything is down below, as well as getting access to the playlist as well if you just want to watch all 3 in one go. Don't forget as well to follow me on social media. Plenty of stuff going on over there all the time. Updates on videos, streams, all of that stuff. So go follow me over there on those platforms. Don't forget as well to check out Lasers Live. Go and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm going to be streaming Assassin's Creed Valhalla in its entirety, my first ever playthrough, when it drops in just a few days. So definitely go over there, subscribe to not miss out on that series. And a big thank you to everyone supporting me over on Patreon. It really does mean the world. It means I can just fucking spend more time working on videos and making them the best that they can be. We just recently passed 300, which is huge, and we're just going to keep growing and growing and doing bits and pieces over there. So thank you all very, very much. I'll see you guys soon for part 3. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you all next time. Goodbye.